In a small, quiet town in the American heartland, every December, the locals gather to set up a Christmas display. It's a beautiful, half-life-size nativity scene, a cherished piece of the town's history. But sitting right beside it, year after year, is something else. Something smaller. Something unsettling. It's a crudely carved wooden toy. A little soldier, worn by time. It looks like any child's keepsake, until you learn who carved it. It wasn't a local father. It wasn't a craftsman. It was carved in the winter of 1944 by a battle-hardened, fanatical prisoner of war, a soldier of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. How did a toy, carved by the hand of an enemy, a man trained to kill Americans, become a cherished treasure in a small Iowa town? This is not the story you were taught. This is the story of a psychological war, fought not with bullets or bombs, but with bacon, hot coffee, and a child's lost doll. It's the story of how American kindness became a secret weapon, one that could shatter a soldier's soul, in a way no artillery shell ever could. And it all began with a ghost. The year is 1943. America is on a war footing. Millions of its sons are overseas, fighting and dying in the deserts of Africa and the jungles of the Pacific. Back home, the nation is united in sacrifice. Rationing is in effect. Families hang gold stars in their windows. The enemy is a faceless monster, a Nazi, a Kraut. And then, the monsters arrived. They came by the thousands, tens of thousands. U-boat crews pulled from the freezing Atlantic. Luftwaffe pilots shot from the skies over England. And legions of soldiers from the vaunted Afrika Korps, captured by the hundreds of thousands after the collapse of Rommel's Desert Army. Shipped across the ocean in the bellies of transport ships, these men were terrified. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine had told them what to expect. They were told Americans were degenerate gangsters, barbarians, who would torture and execute them. They clutched their paybooks, their hands shaking, expecting to be met by firing squads. They were put on trains and sent to Iowa. Imagine their confusion. They stared out the windows, expecting a wasteland. They saw endless rolling fields of corn, neat farmhouses, towering grain silos. They saw an abundance they had been told did not exist. This was the first crack in their worldview. Their destination, Camp Algona, Iowa, a sprawling compound of tar paper barracks, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers, right in the middle of America's breadbasket. By 1944, this one camp would hold 10,000 German prisoners. Among them was a man we will call Oberleutnant Klaus Müller. Klaus was not a simple conscript. He was an original, a true believer. He had marched into Poland in '39. He'd seen the fall of Paris in '40. He was an engineer in Rommel's Afrika Korps, a proud, arrogant veteran who wore his sun-bleached uniform like a badge of honor. He had believed in the Reich. He had believed in the Führer. And now he was prisoner. Number 31G, 4 to 5, 8 to 9. He and his comrades braced for the worst. They marched off the train, through the gates, past American guards holding M1 rifles. They were processed, deloused, and then they were taken to the mess hall. This is where their minds truly began to break. They weren't given hardtack and thin soup. On their first night, they were served hot beef stew, thick slices of fresh white bread, with butter and real, hot, black coffee. With sugar, it was an act of psychological warfare, disguised as a meal. While their own families were starving in bombed-out Berlin, while German soldiers on the Eastern Front were freezing to death, the prisoners, were eating better than they had in years. This was America's first message. We are so rich, so powerful. We can feed our armies, our allies, and our enemies without even trying. The Nazi propaganda was a lie. This kindness was disorienting. It made the hardliners furious. They called it a trick, but for men like Klaus, it planted a seed of doubt, a deep, hollow, aching confusion. Life in Camp Algona settled into a routine. The prisoners were safe. They were warm. They were bored. The Geneva Convention, which America followed to the letter, meant they were treated humanely. They were even offered work. With so many American men at war, there was a massive labor shortage. The prisoners of Algona became a vital workforce. They were paid 80 cents a day in camp scrip, a currency they could use at the camp canteen. A canteen that sold Coca-Cola, cigarettes, Hershey's chocolate bars, and so these Africa Corps veterans, these U-boat hunters, found themselves working on Iowa farms. They picked corn, they detasseled corn, they harvested hemp, they worked in canning factories, and watching over them was Sergeant Hard-Nose Miller. Miller was our other key figure, a fictional man, but his heart represents millions of real ones. Miller was 50 years old, a veteran of the First World War. He'd seen what the Germans were capable of in 1918. He was a farmer. His face was a map of Iowa winters. He didn't hate the prisoners, but he didn't trust them. He saw their arrogant faces. He heard them laughing, and he despised their health. Because Sergeant Miller had a son, a 19-year-old boy, named Private John Miller. And Private Miller was over there. He was somewhere in France, huddled in a foxhole. Cold, wet, hunted. Every night, Sergeant Miller would sit in his small office, listening to the radio reports. The news from the Hurtgen forest was bad. The casualties, staggering. He would pull out a letter from his boy. A letter that was 3 weeks old. "Dear Pop," it read, "it's cold here. Colder than I ever thought possible. We dream about Mom's hot meals. Just one of her apple pies. Tell her I'm okay. Tell her I love her. Don't worry." Miller would fold the letter, his knuckles white. Then he would look out the window at the barracks, where 10,000 healthy German soldiers were sleeping warm in their bunks after eating 3 hot meals. The contradiction, the irony, it burned in his gut. He treated the prisoners fairly. It was his job. It was the American way, but he watched them, especially Klaus Miller. He saw Miller's arrogance, the way he still carried himself like an Oberleutnant. Miller saw in Klaus the very man his son was fighting. The tension between these two men, the captor and the captive, was a wire pulled tight. And in November of 1944, as the first real snow began to fall on Iowa, that wire was about to snap. Klaus Miller was on a work detail. He was assigned to a local lumber yard, loading scrap wood onto a truck. It was cold. The sky was a flat, gray metal sheet. The town was quiet. The war felt a million miles away. Sergeant Miller stood guard, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath pluming in the air. "Keep it moving, Krauts," he growled. "Let's get this done." Klaus worked in silence. He was numb. His life was this: wake up, eat, work, sleep. He hadn't heard from his family in Stuttgart in 6 months. He had a daughter, Anneliese. She would be 6 years old now. He tried not to think about her. The memory was a pain, a physical, sharp-edged thing he couldn't afford to touch. So he focused on the wood, the pine, the sawdust, the rhythm of the work. And then he saw her, a little girl, no older than his Anneliese. She was on the other side of the street, walking with her mother. She was bundled in a red coat with a little matching scarf, and clutched in her mittened hand was a doll. It was a simple rag doll, homemade, worn out, its button eyes loose. Klaus stopped. His hands, still holding a piece of scrap pine, froze. Sergeant Miller noticed. "Miller, what did I say? Move it!" But Klaus couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He was staring at that doll, because 4 years ago, in a different life, on a different continent, he had given his daughter, Anneliese, a doll just like it. He had carved its small head from a piece of birchwood himself. He saw his daughter's face, her laugh, her small hands reaching up to him. A ghost of a life he had destroyed. A ghost, right here, in the middle of Iowa. At that exact moment, The little girl, Susie, tripped on the icy curb. She fell, and the rag doll flew from her grasp. It landed, face down, in the dirty, gray slush of the gutter. The girl burst into tears. Her mother, in a hurry, scooped her up, dusted her off, and hurried her away down the street. Leaving the doll behind, Klaus Müller stood paralyzed. He stared at that forgotten, abandoned doll, lying in the filth. Something inside this hardened soldier, this true believer, shattered. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a complete catastrophic. "Breaking! Müller!" Müller shouted again, walking over, raising his rifle butt. "Are you deaf?" "I said—" Müller stopped. He got his first real look at Klaus's face. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. The Oberleutnant was gone. The man was white. His eyes were wide, glassy, staring at that doll in the gutter. And on his cheek was a single tear. Klaus turned, his eyes hollow, and looked through Sergeant Müller. He didn't say a word. He dropped the piece of wood he was holding, and he stumbled back to the truck and sat down, his head in his hands. That night, back in Barracks 4, Klaus did not eat. He did not sleep. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The image of the doll in the slush. It burned behind his eyes. His bunkmates, the other Afrika Korps veterans, they watched him. The arrogant Oberleutnant was shaking. He kept looking at his own hands. He was seeing the hands that had held a rifle, the hands that had signed artillery orders, the hands that were empty. And in the cold, dark quiet of an Iowa barracks, thousands of miles from the war, Klaus Müller was gripped by a single, overwhelming, primal urge. He had to build something. He had to create. He had to carve. He had nothing. He was a prisoner. His hands were registered. His possessions, a uniform, a thin blanket, and a photo of his daughter, Anneliese. But a man possessed is a resourceful man. The next day, at the lumber yard, Klaus Müller was a different person. The Oberleutnant was gone. The arrogance had evaporated. In his place was a man of cold, singular focus. Sergeant Müller watched him. This change was more alarming than the arrogance. The arrogance was predictable. This silence, this intensity, was dangerous. Klaus worked. He loaded the trucks. But his eyes were scanning, darting. He saw it. A glint of metal in the dirt, a broken piece of a bandsaw blade, no bigger than his thumb. He palmed it. He felt the sharpness of its edge. Then, the wood. He didn't take large pieces, just the scraps, small, smooth blocks of white pine, the perfect size to fit in his clenched fist. He slipped 2 of them into the lining of his tunic. Müller saw it. He saw the slight bulge. He saw the way Klaus protected his side. Weapon, Müller thought. He's making a shiv. The tension ratcheted. That night, Müller led a surprise inspection. He tore Barracks 4 apart. He ripped open mattresses. He dumped out footlockers. He frisked Klaus 3 times. He found nothing. Klaus had been clever. He'd buried the items deep in the mud beneath the barracks floor, a place Müller hadn't thought to look. The lights went out at 10 p.m. The barracks was dark. The air was thick with the breathing of 200 sleeping men. But Klaus was not sleeping. He waited. 1 hour, 2. Then, slowly, he retrieved his treasures, huddled under his thin wool blanket, shielded from the guards' flashlights. Klaus Müller began to carve. It was clumsy at first. His hands were trained to disassemble a Maschinengewehr 42. They were stiff, calloused. He cut himself. He swore, silently. But the image, the ghost of his daughter, and the girl in the red scarf guided his hands. He didn't carve a doll. He didn't know how. He carved what he knew. He carved a soldier, but it was different. He carved the uniform. He carved the helmet. But the hands, he didn't carve them to hold a rifle. He remembered his first meal. The shock of it, the shame of it. He carved the soldier's hands to be holding a small, round loaf of bread. He worked all night. The pile of wood shavings grew at his feet. Just before dawn, it was finished. A small 6-inch soldier. Not a German soldier, not an American soldier, just a soldier holding an offering. His bunkmate, a young, cynical Luftwaffe pilot named Erich, woke up. He saw Klaus hiding something. Klaus, what are you doing? Was machst du? You look like a ghost. Klaus, his hands shaking from exhaustion, opened his palm. Erich's eyes went wide. Are you insane? He whispered, his voice cracking. A doll. They'll find it. They'll send you to solitary. It's contraband. Klaus just looked at him. His eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't explain. He didn't defend himself. He just reached under his pillow and pulled out the tattered photo of Anneliese. He held it next to the carving. Erich stopped. The cynical pilot, who had bragged about his Messerschmitt, looked at the photo. He looked at the toy. He had a younger brother on the Eastern Front. Hadn't heard from him in a year. Erich understood. He didn't say another word. He just nodded. The secret was safe. And the next night, Erich asked Klaus for a piece of wood. The fever spread. It was a silent, secret rebellion. A man who had been a U-boat engineer began carving a small, perfect whale. A panzer crewman began carving a tiny, intricate truck. A gray-haired artillery officer began carving a cradle. The barracks changed. The air, once thick with anger, resentment, and despair, was now thick with sawdust and purpose. This wasn't a hobby. This was therapy. This was atonement. These men, who had been cogs in a machine of destruction, were reclaiming their humanity, one small creation at a time. They weren't prisoners. They weren't Nazis. In the dark, under their blankets, they were fathers. They were brothers. They were sons. But a secret, involving 200 men, cannot stay a secret, especially from Sergeant Miller. Miller knew. He could smell it. The faint scent of fresh-cut pine, he could hear it. The whispering, the shuffling, the faint scratch, scratch, scratch in the night. And he found the evidence. Wood shavings in the latrine, under a loose floorboard. His blood ran cold. The news from Europe was dark. December 1944. A massive, desperate German offensive had just slammed into the American lines in the Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. American casualties were catastrophic. And Private John Miller, Sergeant Miller's son, was right in the middle of it. Miller hadn't had a letter in a month. The rage, the fear, the hate, it was all bubbling to the surface. These men, his prisoners, their brothers, were killing his son. And they were in here, building something. It's a radio, he told the camp commander. A transmitter. They're coordinating an escape. It's weapons, he argued. Daggers, clubs. They're planning an uprising. He tore the barracks apart. Again and again. He found nothing. The prisoners had become experts. They created false bottoms in their footlockers. They hid the carvings inside the walls. The tension in Camp Algona was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Klaus Müller knew they were running out of time. Miller would find them. They needed a solution. They needed a cover. And that is when history and our secret story merge. In Klaus's barracks was a real prisoner, a man named Eduard Kaib. Kaib wasn't a soldier. He was an artist, a designer. He saw what Klaus and the others were doing. He saw the beauty. He saw the risk. And he had a brilliant idea. He said, "We are hiding. What if we stop hiding?" Kaib, with Klaus at his side, went public. They filed a formal petition with the real camp commander, Colonel Arthur T. Lobdell. Imagine the scene. These two hardened German prisoners standing before the American colonel, Sergeant Miller, standing in the corner, fuming. Kaib laid out his plan. "Colonel, Christmas is coming. Our families are gone. Our spirits are low. We wish to build a nativity scene for the camp as a gift, a gesture of peace." Miller snorted. "A trick, Colonel. They want tools. They want access." But Colonel Lobdell was a thoughtful man. He was part of the denazification program. He was trying to show these men the American way. What was more American than Christmas? He saw the propaganda value. He saw the morale boost. He looked at Miller. He looked at Klaus. He approved the project. He granted Edward Kaib and a small team access to tools, to concrete, to paint, to wire. Miller was apoplectic. His hands were tied. He had to let them work. And so, the impossible began. Edward Kaib officially began constructing his magnificent 60-foot-wide nativity scene right in the center of the camp. It was a masterpiece, and it was the perfect cover, because now the secret workshop moved out of the barracks and into the official workshop. The sound of sawing, the smell of pine, the wood shavings, it was all part of the nativity project. Miller watched. He knew. They were building more than just wise men and shepherds. He would stand in the doorway for hours, watching Klaus Müller. Klaus, who was officially mixing concrete and unofficially, in his pocket, was carving a small wooden horse. By the second week of December, the pile of secret toys, hidden inside the framework of the Nativity's manger, was growing. There were dozens, trucks, birds, cats, spinning tops, and Klaus had just finished. His masterpiece, the first carving, the one he had poured all his grief into, the Hoffnungssoldat, the hope soldier. He held it up. It was perfect. Eric, the pilot, looked at it. "It's beautiful, Klaus, but what is it? Who is it for?" Klaus looked through the workshop window, past the barbed wire, toward the small sleeping town of Algona. He whispered, "It is for the girl, the one who lost her doll." A delivery was now being planned, and that was something Sergeant Miller would never allow. December 20th, 1944. The official Nativity project was complete. Edward Kaib's masterpiece was ready, and hidden inside its hollow framework were nearly 200 hand-carved, secret prayers. The prisoners felt a flicker of hope, and that is when Sergeant Miller received the telegram. He was in his small, cold office. The radio was buzzing with static and bad news. The word Bastogne was on everyone's lips. A young private from the mailroom knocked, handed him the yellow envelope. Miller's thick, calloused fingers shook as he tore it open. Three words that destroyed his world. "Regret to inform you. Private John Miller. Missing in action. Missing, not wounded, not captured. Missing in the snows of the Ardennes, swallowed by the fog of war. A ghost." Miller did not cry. He did not shout. He just folded the telegram. Slowly. Precisely. He placed it in his breast pocket. The pity he had felt, the humanity he had glimpsed, it all calcified. It turned into ice. He stood up. He buttoned his greatcoat. He looked out the window at the camp. At their camp, the men, his son, was fighting. The men who were safe. The men who were warm. The men who were carving toys, while his son was gone. He knew, instinctively, where the toys were, the nativity, the lie, the cover. He picked up a crowbar from the motor pool, and he began to walk straight toward the workshop where the finished nativity was stored. The prisoners saw him coming. Klaus, Erich, Eduard Kaib. They stood outside the workshop. They tried to block his path. "Sergeant, bitte, please. It is finished. For Christmas." Miller didn't even look at them. He shoved Klaus so hard, he fell to the ground. "Out of my way!" He kicked the door open. There it was, the grand 60-foot nativity. The shepherds, the wise men, Mary and Joseph, staring serenely. It was beautiful, and Miller hated it. He saw it as a mockery. "Where are they?" he roared. "Sergeant! What? What are you doing?" Kaib pleaded. "The weapons! The radio! Where are they?" He swung the crowbar. He smashed one of the shepherd's faces. The plaster exploded. The prisoners gasped. This was sacrilege. Klaus scrambled to his feet. "Nein, stop! There is nothing!" "Liar!" Miller screamed, his voice breaking. He was crying, tears of pure, unadulterated rage. He stalked around the nativity, hunting. He knew there was a secret, and then he saw it. Inside the manger, a loose panel. He jammed the crowbar in and pulled. The wood splintered, and they tumbled out. First, a trickle, then a flood. 200 wooden toys. They poured onto the workshop floor. Wooden trucks, spinning tops, small birds, carved horses, dolls, whales. They clattered in the awful echoing silence. Miller froze. He stared. This was not what he expected. He was ready for daggers. He was ready for bombs. He was not ready for this. He bent down, his hand trembling. He picked one up. A small wooden truck he'd given his own son, one just like it. In 1932, he looked confused. His rage had nowhere to go. It was like trying to punch fog. "What is this?" he whispered. "What is this trick?" Klaus Müller walked slowly toward him. He did not pick up a toy. He reached inside his own tunic, and he pulled out the tattered black and white photograph. He held it out to Miller. Anneliese Miller flinched. "My Tochter?" Klaus said, his voice thick. "My daughter." He pointed to the pile of toys. "No, trick, Sergeant." He pointed through the wall toward the town. "For them, for the kinder, the children." He then reached into the pile. He rummaged, and his hand found it. The first carving. The Hope Soldier. He held it out, in the palm of his hand. An offering. "This," Klaus said, "this is Hoffnung, hope. It is for the girl with the red scarf, the one who lost her doll." Miller looked at the small carved soldier. He looked at the photograph of the German girl, Anneliese, and he saw his own son, John. He saw him, age 6, playing on the farmhouse floor. And in that moment, the enemy vanished. The Nazi was gone. The uniforms disappeared. There were 2 men in a room. 2 fathers. Both broken. Both haunted by the ghosts of their children. Miller's rage did not just fade, it collapsed. It left him hollow. He took the small wooden soldier from Klaus's hand. He stared at it. He saw the helmet. He saw the loaf of bread. He understood. He wept. He didn't make a sound, but the tears, they streamed down his leathered, winter-beaten face. He was mourning for his son, for Klaus's daughter, for all of it. He stood there for a long, long time. Then he wiped his face. He turned to the smashed shepherd. He looked at the pile of toys. He nodded. "Kaib," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Fix," the shepherd. "Fix it now." He looked at Klaus. "And you, all of you, pick these up. Get boxes." He tacked the broken panel back on the manger. He hid the toys again. Then he turned and walked out. He never filed a report, but he did more than that. Sergeant Miller went straight to Colonel Lobdell's office. He had a plan. A crazy, impossible, American plan. Christmas Eve, 1944. The town of Algona was somber. The news from the Bulge was terrifying. Every family knew someone in the fight. There was no Christmas spirit, and then they got the invitation from Colonel Lobdell. He was inviting the entire town to come to the camp for a Christmas Eve service, to see a nativity scene built by the POWs. It was an outrage. See a Nazi Christmas? Have they gone mad? The anger in the town was palpable, but it was also curiosity. And it was Christmas. They came hesitantly, a few dozen, then 100. Men, women, children. They stood in the bitter cold, outside, the wire, staring at the enemy. The camp was dead silent. The POWs were locked in their barracks, all except one. Klaus Müller was standing in the shadows with Sergeant Miller. Colonel Lobdell gave a speech. He spoke of peace, of goodwill. Then he gave the signal. The searchlights snapped on, and they illuminated Eduard Kaib's masterpiece. The townspeople gasped. It was breathtaking. It wasn't propaganda. It wasn't arrogant. It was reverent. It was art. It was Christmas. They stared in stunned silence, and in that hush, Sergeant Miller gave another signal. The main gate creaked open. The townspeople tensed, and Sergeant Miller and 2 other American guards walked out, their arms full of boxes. The boxes that Klaus had packed. Miller walked right up to the crowd. He put down the box. He opened in, and he took out a small wooden horse. He looked at the crowd. His voice cracked in the cold air. "The prisoners," he cleared his throat. "They made these for your children, for Christmas." Shock, horror. A mother screamed and pulled her son back. "A trick!" a man shouted. "Poison! Booby traps!" The crowd recoiled. They stared at the toys as if they were snakes. Sergeant Miller stood his ground, his heart pounding. This was the real battle. He scanned the crowd, and he saw her. The red scarf, the little girl, Susie. She was hiding behind her father's leg. Miller walked past the angry, shouting parents. He knelt in the snow in front of her. The entire town went silent. He wasn't holding the horse. He was holding the small Hope soldier, the one Klaus had given him. He held it out. The girl's father stepped in front. No, Miller looked up. His eyes met the father's eyes. "Sir," Miller said, his voice breaking, "my son is in the Ardennes. He is missing." The father's face changed. His own brother was in the 101st. Miller kept his hand out. It is a gift from a father to a child. He wasn't asking, he was begging. Please, he thought, please end this. Please choose hope. The little girl, Susie, peeked out from behind her father. She looked at the toy. She looked at Miller's kind, sad eyes. And she reached out her small mittened hand, and she took the soldier, and the dam of hate broke. It crumbled. A boy stepped forward, and another. A mother cried. One by one, the children of Algona walked up to the boxes, and they took the toys back inside the wire. 200 German prisoners stood pressed against the barbed wire, watching. They watched as the children of their enemy played with the gifts they had made, and the Afrika Korps, the Luftwaffe, the U-boat crews. These hardened, arrogant believers. They wept. It was not a surrender of arms. It was a surrender of the soul. Their ideology, their hate, their pride was shattered forever. Not by a bomb, but by a small wooden horse. This was America's true victory. The war ended. In 1946, the prisoners were sent home. Eduard Kaib, the real artist, formally gifted his nativity scene to the town of Algona. A permanent, thank you, Klaus Müller, our symbol, returned to a ruined Stuttgart. His city was ash, but his daughter, Anneliese, she was alive. He found her in a refugee camp. He held her for the first time in 6 years, and in his pocket was a new carving, a small red bird. He had carved it on the boat home, and Sergeant Miller, 2 months later, he received another telegram. Private John Miller had been found alive. He had been liberated from a German POW camp. He was emaciated. He had frostbite, but he was coming home. Kindness had been repaid. And today, right now, if you go to Algona, Iowa, at Christmas, you will see Eduard Kaib's nativity. It is the pride of the town. And if you look closely, right next to the manger, local legend insists the town still places a small, weathered wooden soldier holding a loaf of bread, a silent reminder that even in the darkest, coldest winter of human history, a single act of creation, a single act of fatherhood, a single act of American kindness can build a bridge and shine a light that never, ever goes out. If this hidden piece of history touched your heart, it's because stories like this are more than just history. They are lessons. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. We find these untold stories so that their echo is never lost. What did your grandparents tell you about the war? Share their memories in the comments below, and thank you for keeping their spirit alive.